Greetings, I'm Mark Greene, and welcome to my home just outside Nashville, Tennessee. Debbie Curtis recently asked me to put together this video, and when Debbie asks me to do something, I know better than to turn her down, so here goes. She asked me to talk a little bit about my work, my interests, and my perspectives, so here goes. My work was largely influenced by my education, which is pretty strange. I started with my bachelor's from Case Western Reserve, studying electrical engineering, but then switched to classical rhetoric, studying mainly Aristotle, for my master's at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, go Heels, and then finished with my doctorate in market research in Chapel Hill. And believe it or not, that's all come to bear on what I've done since, but especially, of course, my doctorate in market research. I started by working in-house and then as a market research consultant for people like Warner Communications, American Express, Citibank, CBS, ComSat. GE was my biggest client for a long time, 15 GE businesses all over the world, and that started my international consulting, which consumed a lot of my years. But eventually, the Big Eight got wind of what I was doing, and I ended up working for about half of what were then called the Big Eight accounting firms. And that was my first taste of professional services and professional services marketing. Before long, a few very forward-thinking law firms got wind of what I was doing for the big accounting firms and said they wanted some of that too. Now, this was only about a decade after the Bates decision first made it legal for law firms to do any kind of advertising, thus marketing, and so these were pretty cutting-edge firms. I quickly came to understand that law firms really didn't have a clue in terms of business, and a lot of them, in fact, refused to even acknowledge that their profession was a business, and saying words like sales was absolutely forbidden in a lot of the firms that I worked with. This was like the early 1990s, and it was a very different time back then. But they had a lot of money, and they wanted some of what the big accounting firms were getting, even if they weren't sure quite why, so they were willing to spend some of it on me. Even though I didn't have a JD, my PhD gave me a little bit of credibility with the lawyers, and off we went. I've danced around a little bit about what to call who I was then, but back then we were called non-lawyers. Any kind of consultant without a JD or even hadn't practiced law were defined by what we weren't in that rather disparaging non-lawyer term. And there were a few other brave souls who put up with that. Elenide Sims, your president, my dear friend Annalee Gibson, a lot of wonderful friends and colleagues who have since passed away, Gary Fawcett, Michael O'Horo, Jay Jaffe, Richard Levick, Berkey Belser, and others. Great folks, now no longer with us, but were among the non-lawyers getting our start into law firms way back then. My goal was to introduce what I considered to be the best practices of international business as practiced by big corporations into the legal industry. Back then it was quite an uphill battle, but that was what I was all about. By 2004, I'd worked for quite a few of the big global firms and given a lot of speeches, written a few articles, and established some credibility. Speaking of the world's largest firms, I should mention the big London firms called the Magic Circle. They got it. They were much more business-oriented than were any of the American firms. Even really forward-thinking law firm leaders like Ralph Baxter and Harry Trueheart, Pete Kalis, the Magic Circle were clearly the leaders. They were businesses and they knew it. But at about that time, I got a call saying that I was being inducted into the College of Law Practice Management, which I'd never heard of, and I had no idea who might have nominated me for fellowship, but sounded interesting, so I went to Vancouver for the meeting. There weren't conferences back then, it was just a meeting, and didn't recognize a soul in the room. But there was a wonderful gentleman, the dearly departed Chuck Coulter, who kind of took me under his wing and showed me around and introduced me to people, and Chuck was just great and was a friend from then on. And I met a lot of other really great friends, even those early days in the college. There were a few other non-lawyers, besides me who had been inducted: Norm Rubinstein, Maggie Callicrate, Mary Lynn Tarleton, Berkey Belser. There's probably others. So I wasn't the first, but those were the early days. Before long, somehow I ended up on the board, and then was reelected to the board, and then was term limited, so I had to leave the board, but they decided they didn't want me to leave, so they suspended the bylaws so I could become the president of the college. President-elect, president, past president. So I think I served on the board longer than anybody else. I'm not sure, but probably. There's also another organization called the Legal Marketing Association, and I was on that board the second longest of anybody ever. Anyway, I have since taken enough money from lawyers as a consultant and am retired. I was chief marketing officer. I was chief strategy officer for a few firms. Mainly I was consulting from the outside, but I was in-house at places like O'Melveny and Myers, Nixon Peabody, Waller here in Nashville, interim chief marketing officer for Munger Tolles out in LA. But the college and the LMA served as a great support group for people like me, and we needed it because the lawyers, especially initially, didn't treat people like me very well, and we needed a lot of support from each other, and the college was great in providing that. I met a lot of lifelong friends, and I'm just thrilled with the college for that. Now, I ride my bicycle. This past summer, I rode from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, camping along the way. Great adventure. I play in my garage band here in Nashville. I collect guitars. And I'm serving on a couple of nonprofits which have nothing to do with the legal industry. And that's pretty much the whole story. About 30 years after my first law firm engagement, I see now that a lot of law firms are being run by real professional business people. The lawyers have turned over the reins exactly the way they should if they want to really be run like businesses. And almost all lawyers embrace the business of law. So we've come a long way.
Hi, my name is Susan Raridon Lambreth, and I was inducted as a fellow in the year 2000. And it's funny to say that because it's so long ago, but I remember it very well, meeting in La Jolla. And back then, as some of you may know, the college was founded by many members of the ABA Law Practice Management section who were the early pioneers in things like using computers in law offices, which was rare back in the 80s and early 90s, and in other topics like alternative fee arrangements, where our fellow, now deceased Dick Reed, wrote the first book, Beyond the Billable Hour, back in the late 80s, I think it was. So it's been a pleasure and honor to be part of this for all these years. And professionally, I've really focused on several areas. I practiced law many years ago in Philadelphia, and then I got into the consulting business, first with Altman & Weil for 7 years, and then I was recruited over to be a partner at Hildebrandt and was there for 20 years. In the midst of that, of course, many of you know, we were acquired by Thomson Reuters, and then they decided to get out of the consulting business in 2011, and the management consulting part of Hildebrandt spun out to be LawVision, which is the company that I help lead today. I've spent about the last 30 years working in the area of practice group management, helping many of the largest law firms in the country either implement their practice group structure or enhance it in some way, or train their practice group leaders. And I wrote 4 books on that subject, including an update of one of the books that came out last year, The Practice Group Leader's Handbook for Success. And then about 15 years ago, I also started working in the area of legal project management, as I saw this evolution from when I first got in this business, of firms managing at the firm management level to then managing down at the practice group or department level, to then really coming out of the global financial crisis needing to manage down at the matter level, which is essentially what project management is. And so with a colleague, and working with 2 different academic institutions, we developed a very experiential certification program for legal project management that's had thousands and thousands of people go through it in the last 14 years. It was the first certification for legal project management, launched in June of 2010. And so, as I said, I've written 4 books in that subject as well, written a total of 9 books, 4 in project management and 4 in practice group management, and 1 with Connie Breton on legal operations. And then I also run what are kind of many professional associations for law firm roles, business professional roles. The first one started in 2001, which was for practice group directors in law firms. It has about 400 members in it now from about 40 firms. And so they are basically like the COO of a practice group or department, helping the department chair or practice group leader or lawyer leader run the group. And then we also have a round table for legal project management. I actually just ran that group yesterday in DC. Project management heads and their teams, and one for legal pricing heads and their teams. That one Law Vision just helps administer, and Colin Jasper, who's also a fellow, and Stuart Dodds really provide the content for that and are the leaders of that. And then one for innovation and value leaders, the chief innovation roles or the chief value officer roles or similar titles in law firms. And I'm running that with also our fellow Jen Leonard, who's speaking at this meeting. And I'm really looking forward to her session. And I've really enjoyed working with her on that. And then personally, I continue to be a competitive runner for many, many decades, from doing 5Ks to marathons for many years, and now back to my roots from college of track and field and doing track events. I think that's kind of the summary of where I am, and I really look forward to seeing some of my old friends at the meeting, as well as meeting many new people, and can't wait to see you all. Thanks.